So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now 1:30. We intend to start this session. But before starting, I have a little checklist here to go through. Please silence your mobile devices. We don't want that much of interruptions. And the session evaluations will be completed online, but we really encourage you to fill this out because it's very great help for us that do these presentations to find out what we can improve and thus having a better quality the coming year. Okay.
ONVIF is also recording this presentation for posting on the ONVIF website. So if they are making sure to get the presenters only, not the audience. So making sure we meet all the laws of requirements for the various countries.
And we do encourage you to raise your hand and ask a question as we go along in the presentation. Otherwise, we might come over to a different topic and it be all forgotten. So we're good to go?
Yep. Excellent.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about driving the future and how interoperability standards within access control can enable the success of smart buildings. And to do that, we have myself. I'm the chairman of the ONVIF steering committee. I've committed my entire life to electronic controls equipment and network cameras and this and that. And I've been chairing ONVIF since the past 6-7 years. And we have had great success, especially within the video area. And now we expect to be able to recreate that good success in the access control. And with me, I have here.
I'm Bob Dolan. I am the testing manager for Anixter. I run our facility in Chicago that I do evaluation of product and testing of new security products. I've been with ONVIF for 5 years. Anixter's been a member of ONVIF for about 10 years. So actively working with the group and understanding where technology is coming from.
And as a guest for us to get a little bit of feedback on the actual market demands, I have here on my right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bryan Montany. I am a research analyst with IHS Markit. So IHS Markit essentially writes third-party market research reports on a great many fields, ranging from automotive to energy to like oil and gas markets to transportation. And we have a ton of different market research reports and intelligence services that we offer. I specifically work with IHS Markit's Home and Building Technologies group. I actually started with the group a couple years ago working in the smart building sector and with building automation equipment, HVAC equipment, looking at commercial buildings from the energy side. And now I have transitioned over to being the primary analyst responsible for the Access Control Intelligence Service. So it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Brian. I think this is really good and interesting input because we all come from different industries here and getting the full picture because I think it's especially the smart building that makes this interoperability aspect very interesting. So during the session today, we will take a look at the state of the access control market. We will talk a little bit about the emergence of standards and the benefit of ONVIF specifically and other standards. And then we will have a little bit of future outlook on security and beyond for this purpose. So if we start with ONVIF, I don't know how many of you that are familiar with ONVIF. We have been around since 2008. And we have a mission and a vision, like most of the organizations, and that is to provide and promote these open interfaces to the security industry for effective interoperability. And our vision is that in the future, we will all share one interface. And I think that it's not so easy to say it's not happening. If we're looking today at what's happening in the phone and IoT and things, they are merging together in a way, so it's very easy and comprehensive to use things. And we have to make sure that we base this on standards. In the history of ONVIF, we have decided to work with what we call profiles. And the reason why we call them profiles is that as technology evolves, so does specifications in technology. and we want to detach a profile from a specification to make sure that we can offer uninterrupted interoperability regardless of the technical evolution that takes place. For the access control area, we have specifically two profiles. That is the Profile C and Profile A, and Bob will describe those a little bit more in detail. The other profiles we have are for video mostly, and it's for storage and retrieval, which is the G profile. The S profile is for basic showing of video and controlling cameras. Profile S is somewhat old, so it's now being replaced with Profile T as technology is evolving. We have now new compression technologies, so we need a new profile to accommodate that. And we also have a installer's profile, which makes it easier to enable the devices on an ONVIF supported network. So state of the market for access control. You want to say something about this?
So again, we've looked at kind of where the market's been. If you look at where we've migrated from, the late 90s, early 2000s, we went from the standard video recorder, video VCR to a DVR, and we migrated that technology to a network-based application. By about 2006, in the video space, the IP camera started showing its value. That migration really started helping us to not just support the ability to get information quicker to different places, but also to search and record the data. We saw the fact that that tape that we were recording on, very similar to the data tape that IT managers were using. They were recording on tape drives. And then we started changing that over time to different codecs and migrating there. So kind of from that history, we saw that migration. And at that time, the IT department started taking over and running the security business within their organizations. They saw that it being just data, so they were having some input with the security organizations. They were handling the transport and storage of the video, where the security operations were handling the quality of the video and the placement of the devices from a video perspective. So we saw those migrations kind of going through that transformation. If you want to go to the next slide, if you look at where we were at, PCs and local area networks really started developing PCs in the late 80s, and then we started saying, hey, we can put these PCs together and connect them and get a value out of connected networks. And so that local area network came out. From a data perspective, the first thing beyond data and the network, the PC, was the phone. So in the late 90s, early 2000, we migrated to voice over IP and the ability to bring phones onto the network. About 2006, as we spoke about, all of a sudden video surveillance started becoming viable on the network. So we started getting ideas of how do we record video. And it really became a cost-effective way for end users to use their network that they had already developed. They had developed this local area network or this voice over IP network. They were taking this data, which all video was turning out to be was just data. They were bringing that onto the network. Well, IT managers today are saying, what else can we put on our network? And so, as we get into the conversation more today, we'll start talking about smart buildings. You'll run, and we've looked at and done a lot of research on it, there are as many as 42 different systems within a building that can be put onto the network that are running some sort of protocol, whether it's BACnet or Profibus or Modbus or just all the different protocols that can be put on and bridged over to a network. So as we migrate IP cameras, access control became the next step in the security space. Now, one of the things you'll hear from us as we go on today is access control is very slow to migrate. Cameras, the cost of a camera and the lifespan of a camera is about 5 to 7 years for a camera. The old analog cameras, I still run into people that are, I've got analog cameras that are out there that are 20 years old and they love them, and that's great, but it comes down to image quality. All right, the analog camera of 20 years ago can't hold up to the video quality of what the cameras can do today. So we're seeing a lot of migration in the camera space, and the IT manager is saying, what other devices, what other systems? And access control, although it's migrating, it's much slower to migrate. And Bryan can probably attest to that with some of the numbers he's going to show you. The idea there is really the lifespan of the devices are 12 to 20 years on an access control system. So it's a little bit slower to migrate, but we're getting into the ability to change and bring the systems onto the network. So ONVIF is working towards that, and we've got a lot of members that are in the major manufacturers that are working on this. And you'll see, you saw the Profile C and Profile A. We'll get into those. And kind of the idea there is we're seeing a lot of other migrations occur. So we're seeing, that from a historical perspective, it's just going from one to the next.
And if we're looking at it in a bigger perspective, everything today is coming onto the network. It's just like they're merging together. We have the building management trends. You want to control everything in the building. And we have seen that the analog's long life cycle, like Bob mentioned here, has sort of slowed it down. But now when there are new investments, you can hardly find anything that supports the analog world anymore. So migration is taking place, and especially when you're talking smart building. I don't recall how many networks you said there were in a smart building, but look at it from a maintenance perspective, how many low voltage networks that you have to maintain. One of the early successes with IP video was that certain organization could limit the number of low voltage networks in their organizations by putting fire, access, video, back office, everything on the same network. So just by adding a little extra on that network, they could support all those different networks.
As we started developing this panel, when we met Bryan, I was pretty excited because Bryan can talk more about that HVAC integration because that was his previous world. So.
Oh, absolutely. I'll start from my perspective from defining smart buildings. IHS Markit defines smart buildings as a building with fully integrated domains and automated analytical processes to control building operations through centralized or a distributed platform. We call those platforms that can be software, simply software, that can be hardware and software combined. We call them all building management system or BMS platforms. And those platforms act as the building's artificial intelligence. You can have one, you can have multiple that are integrated together and that work off each other. There's many different frameworks for it. But smart buildings under IHS Markit's definition is still very much in its infancy as a market. However, we're seeing today that the foundation is being set for future innovations with advanced analytics, big data processing and machine learning. Specifically with HVAC and building automation equipment, we're now seeing over 45% of all newly installed HVAC and building automation equipment are connected in some way, some capacity to a building management system platform. So in that perspective, in the energy domains, they're outpacing the security domains like access control and video surveillance in terms of the integration rates. But security is actually not too far behind. Access control specifically in last year, 2018, IHS Markit found that nearly 30% of newly sold access control equipment of all types was integrated in some capacity with a building management system platform, including security integration platforms, building energy management system platforms, all different types included in that definition. But that's an exciting trend that we're really seeing accelerating in the market today.
So where Profile A came from, ONVIF started with Profile C, and Profile C was a little bit more in the hardware component. Profile A got us into credentialing, and we got into the idea of where the credentials, with the data that you could get from credentials, and we talk about that added data and that smart building. We're starting to harvest the data that Bryan's talking about out of these other HVAC systems. And we joked 20 years ago, yeah, somebody can drive up into their parking lot and we can have license plate recognition, turn on the lights in their office and turn on their HVAC. And yeah, we could do it, but it was a lot of wiring and a lot of I/O ports. And now because we're network-based, between the lighting and all these other systems, now you're getting a lot of data from the systems that are linking, and you're doing it virtually. So as opposed to the hardwire that we've done in the past. So it comes down to really that added data that we're looking for.
So as part of my research for a report that I wrote on BMS platforms and connected equipment in smart buildings last year, I interviewed system integrators, installers, end users, including building owners, as well as facility and security managers. And one of the most important questions that I asked everyone from a security perspective was basically which systems in the security and life safety domains, such as video surveillance, fire detection and suppression, intrusion detection, and access control, are the highest priority to potentially integrate into a broader smart building or BMS platform architecture. And the overwhelming answer was access control. In 2018, we've already seen that access control is the most common security domain to be integrated with any energy domain through a BMS platform. And the most common integration between two security domains has been for now decades and continues to remain access control and video surveillance. There are two critical roles for access control equipment in smart building architectures. First, it can be a comparatively low-cost alternative for many building owners to rely on access control systems as opposed to occupancy sensors to give an idea and reliably estimate overall occupancy levels in a building or in rooms or zones of a building where access may be controlled. And more importantly, entrance through an access control system can act as a trigger, initiating responses from the BMS platform and controlling other connected domains. For example, if you're an employee and you're scanning your badge to enter into the smart building where you work, in response to you scanning your badge, in a truly sophisticated smart building system, the BMS platform can recognize who you are based on the access control credential and where you work in the building. And so HVAC systems and lighting systems around the area where you work. Let's say you're entering the building and it's midnight. Though only the systems near where you work can turn on in response to you scanning your badge to enter, an elevator can be called to the appropriate floor that you're entering the building from. There's a lot of use cases like that that are still decades away from being seen in most buildings, but we're seeing some test cases, we call them lighthouse projects, that are being displayed with this technology today, and we're going to continue seeing that growth of BMS platform integrations and command and control analytics in the future. So I can just continue and jump into an access control overview of some of the numbers that IHS Markit has compiled. These are global figures from the most recent report that IHS Markit has published in the access control intelligence service. In about 6 weeks, actually, I will be publishing an update to this report. So these numbers are 2017 world market statistics. I am working on the 2018 statistics basically as we speak. But a few interesting factoids that I find compelling about access control when you compare them to other areas that I've written about, other security domains like video surveillance and intrusion detection. First, there's a fairly even regional distribution in sales of access control equipment worldwide. In video surveillance, for example, nearly half of the video surveillance market overall is based on sales in China. China alone is over 45% of the video surveillance market, just based on strong demand for video surveillance systems and a lot of new construction projects in that country. And by contrast, in the access control domain, we see North America and the Americas in general is the largest region, but only 37% of the market size. However, over 80% of that market size is basically two countries, the US and Canada. In the EMEA region, which is Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, it's about 75% of that 1.5 billion is in Western and Central Europe, and the remaining 25% is mostly Eastern Europe and the Middle East. It's surprising, too, that there are fairly even growth rates. You might think that certain regions were growing much faster than others, and certainly on the country level. For example, Italy is only growing at 2% and is one of the slowest growing national markets. India, meanwhile, is one of the fastest growing with a growth rate, CAGR, of 14%. So there's pretty different growth rate stories, different growth opportunities in different country markets, but in the regions overall, it averages out to around between 5 to 6% in North America, in Europe, and in Asia.
The next slide.
So, yeah, I wanted to cover some of the basic market trends and give you kind of a top-level overview of some of the major trends that IHS Markit is seeing today. Per and Bob, you can definitely interject if any of these trends coincide with some major talking points around interoperability. I know a lot of these trends and access control in general is just moving, as you've talked about earlier, towards that kind of merger where it's more than just access control systems as a separate domain, a separate island. It's more about combining access control with other security systems, with energy systems in a building, and just a lot of use cases around that new internet connectivity. So starting with mobile credentials, it's fascinating from my perspective. IHS Markit has heard a lot about mobile credentials over the past half decade, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about mobile credentials as well. There's been a lot of hype around this sudden transition from physical credentials to credentials on your smartphone. And what we've actually found, and what's fascinating to me, is that although there's been a lot of talk for years about mobile credentials, the actual growth that we've been seeing in terms of market size globally has been strong from a perspective of, year-to-year annual growth numbers, but weaker than we anticipated in terms of overall market size, in terms of credentials being available on the market year over year. In 2018, I think around 8% of all credentials introduced into the market that year, not just sold, but even given away as part of a package to end users, were mobile credentials. The other 92% were still physical credentials.
One of the dynamics that I've seen in the mobile credential market is really the concept of where millennials are coming from. Millennials are very willing to use a mobile credential. The older generations do not like the mobile credential. They don't like the app. They don't like the use of a piece of electronics. But the problem we're seeing is more of the fact that if I have a physical badge on, I know you belong on the property. Where a mobile credential does not lead to the ability to have the knowledge that you belong on the property. So there's that kind of give and take. We're seeing organizations where it's the C level, where everybody knows the C level or the upper management. Those guys are getting those folks are getting the mobile credential, whereas the more changeable market or changeable employees within an organization still have to wear the badge. So we're seeing some dynamics like that in the mobile.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, beyond hospitality, which is really the strongest market right now for new mobile credential adoption rates, the strongest markets for mobile credentials include education, which certainly makes sense given the number of millennials out there, as in school, as well as some high-tech firms like the Silicon Valley IT firms that tend to have younger working populations in terms of employees. So yeah, and related to that, I think an issue that IHS Markit has heard a lot about from vendors who are providing mobile credentials in the market today is how do we monetize mobile credentials? How do we incentivize the actual sale of mobile credentials? And so far, many access control vendors are actually basically giving mobile credentials away as part of a package deal, as part of an overarching solution, because it's hard when you're selling mobile credentials separately to entice purchases when end users are saying, well, if it's going to cost us more money, we'll just stick with physical credentials. We'll just stick with what already works. In spite of that, by 2022, IHS Markit estimates that over 55 million new mobile credentials will be introduced to the market, either sold or given away in some capacity to end users year over year globally, with a significant portion, nearly half of those being sold into North America, which will be the strongest market. So yeah, any other thoughts on mobile credentials?
Yeah.
Or okay. Moving on to frictionless biometric readers. Biometrics have been and continue to be the fastest growing reader type. They won't replace smart card readers anytime soon. Smart card and prox card readers still significantly outnumber biometric readers in the market today, but they're growing well. And it's fascinating for me to see that growth, given that it's not too long ago, less than a decade ago, IHS Markit heard a lot from vendors about concerns over whether biometric readers would become more popular in the market due to privacy concerns, just concerns especially in the North American and European markets that maybe end users would be uncomfortable, essentially giving away information about their bodies themselves in order to access certain parts of buildings. And so far, those privacy concerns really have not been a significant deterrent. As it turns out, most people, employees, occupants in a building are pretty comfortable just scanning their biometric data. To date, over 90% of global unit shipments of biometric readers are still conventional fingerprint readers. It's a little bit lower in Asia, where we're seeing a little bit more frictionless facial and iris recognition reader adoption. But overall, still very high fingerprint adoption compared to some of the more frictionless alternatives, iris recognition, again, facial. But there are strong opportunities with biometric readers, especially facial and iris recognition readers. We're seeing over 30% annual growth year over year with facial recognition readers. And iris recognition is also growing at nearly 20% worldwide. A lot of that growth right now is focused in the Asian region, specifically in China, as well as in Korea, Southeast Asia, and a few other countries in that region. But we're still seeing very high growth rates even in North America and Europe. So yeah. Moving on to access control as a service. I will be pretty quick here, as I actually don't cover this for IHS Markit, another analyst does. But just to provide you with a couple of basic figures, the access control as a service market is growing 3 times faster than the market for access control equipment, with a CAGR of over 15%. So that is really significant growth there. And finally, increasing.
On the access control the access control as a service, what I'm seeing is it's going to be on a server, and it doesn't matter. We're seeing IT guys, as they get involved in it, they're not concerned whether it's on their property or someplace else. So it's really coming down to the security people and the security organizations that are saying, that's our data. I don't trust that being in the cloud. I don't trust that being someplace else. So the question is the cybersecurity and the confidence that you have in that cloud service that you're choosing to use. So the IT department has gotten very comfortable with as a service on many systems. So access control as a service is just another as a service that they're running into.
Absolutely. And it definitely appeals more to small and mid-sized businesses that don't have the resource to afford the initial cost of installing those conventional access control systems. If you have the resources, we're still seeing most enterprise-level buildings install the equipment and not move over to this service model. Finally, looking at increasing demand for system integrations, this correlates a lot with what we've been talking about so far. There's just a long-standing trend in this market towards interconnectivity. First and foremost, interconnectivity between access control equipment and equipment from other physical security systems. I already talked a little bit about video surveillance, and the cost of unified access control and video surveillance systems dropped by between 30 and 50% between 2015 and 2017, and that is a major driver for growth of these integrations. In addition, end users are increasingly expecting and demanding these integrations, particularly, again, of access with video surveillance, but we're even seeing access with intrusion detection, access with mass notification systems, and that's very exciting. And then looking even more broadly, integration with access control and BMS platforms. So for example, when an intrusion occurs that is detected by an alarm, or you scan your badge and you're unauthorized, a BMS platform can prompt the access control system to lock down rooms or zones of a building automatically. And we're also seeing integrations with energy systems such as lighting controls. And finally, on this note, I think a key question moving forward is when and whether a BMS platform should be enabled to override the logic of the access control provider's software in the event of conflicts. I heard a lot about that when I was writing my smart buildings report, just a lot of concern from the subordinate, we call them subordinate domain, such as access control equipment providers, of where their software is going to fit into the equation once authority is ceded to a BMS platform. And the answer is that in centralized architectures, at least, the BMS platform provider wants to design their platform to exert ultimate authority as the building's central intelligence and have its analytics supersede orders from the software and subordinate domains. And you can just imagine the kind of issues that that's going to create moving forward, especially as these smart building architectures become more popular in the market today. So yeah, we can move on to the next slide.
Yep.
So yeah, this is one of the most interesting market shifts we're seeing with access control product types, and really a dominant narrative in the market today. The access control market in general with equipment just has been fairly slow moving, but here is an exception to that rule where we're seeing with control panels that it is actually quite quick in terms of the adoption of IP-enabled control panels and network controllers and access control projects. This looks at annual growth rates. So here, that blue line for IP-enabled controllers, we're seeing an average of around 12% growth year over year projected. And IP-enabled controllers already constitute nearly 40% of the market size in terms of unit shipments. So that's only going to keep growing. And as of basically last year, serial controllers, the market is finally beginning to contract. So there's this movement away from serial controllers towards IP controllers that has been pretty aggressive. And there still will be a market for these other controller types, standalone keypad, self-contained keypad controllers that are only used to control access through a single door and are not connected. There's going to continue to be a market for that, especially in smaller sized buildings that may only have one perimeter entryway. And edge controllers, there's still some growth for edge controllers. By the way, directly connected readers that do not include a control panel in their architecture, we call those edge controllers. So that market is still growing, but it's only at 5% of the overall market size. So it's small in terms of market size. There still is some growth there. but I know that the growth of IP-enabled controllers directly feeds into, opportunities with interoperability. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that.
Okay.
And so this last slide from me just shows a little bit about how the market for readers is changing. So in 2017, based on our current data, basically a little more than a quarter of the readers sold in the market today are still predominantly Proxcard, a very small amount of magnetic stripe, but mostly Proxcard readers. The market has certainly, for the most part, adopted smart card and biometric readers, the more secure technologies for credentialing. It's just, there are still a lot of retrofit projects, especially, interestingly enough, in the United States, that are still stubbornly kind of holding on to Proxcards. And Proxcards won't disappear altogether, but by 2022, we expect that they'll be less than 15% of the overall market. So that is a pretty significant shift. So yeah.
So let's move over to the emerging standards, and maybe you noticed that one of the more or less conditions for this to happen is that we do have open standards for this to happen. There is not really room for any proprietary standards by manufacturer to build silos, so we need to be able to integrate and make devices interoperable between manufacturers. So the message is loud and clear that product must be connected to an IP network to be able to exist, to go back to the fact of maintaining different low voltage network. Preferably we have one network managed by the IT professionals and is driven by analytics, real-time decisions and complete connectivity in this domain. And you can see with any of these international standard organizations you see on the right here that they do monitor this, they do have standards that provides these different type of connectivities. And you see that to be able to fully utilize this, to utilize the IoT, you need solid build of open standards. You need the openness and you need the unlimited interoperability between these. We don't believe that it will be doable if you approach this from a silo perspective.
So ONVIF, as we talked about, the Profile C came out several years ago. It was designed about the hardware for the control panel. Profile A came out about a year and a half ago. That was more designed for the credentialing. So as ONVIF works, what we're working on is how do we start, you can't take access control as a whole and create a standard because there's so much, and access control is so big. What we're basically doing is biting it off in bits and taking bit by bit and creating various components for the standards to be resolved. Right now there's another working group that's building on more technology pieces of it. But the working group is made up of, believe it or not, some of the major organizations, major companies that are in the market space. So one of the things that we get concerned about is, are we moving fast enough and are we moving the right way? And the groups that are in the working group, or the companies that are in the working group, are truly knowledgeable about what's going on because their companies are actively selling products currently in the market space. So they're not protecting their own space. They're protecting and looking at from an open interface and how do customers and how can we get to that open interface for all devices. It's a time-consuming process. So right now we've got Profile C, Profile A is out, and as we move forward, we're working on some more pieces of it. So, again, Profile C, the idea there is to allow the physical access control and the VMS to start working together. Profile A, like I said, is the credentialing and the configuration of systems. In the ONVIF space, what we look at is, although you have a video camera that is Profile S or Profile T conformant, it can also be Profile A conformant as well. So the idea now is, as you get into the concept of facial recognition and the apps that are being developed, that analytic is a credential. So if I put an analytic out there in a camera that is both profile T and profile A conformant, that essentially becomes a reader. So now we're getting into the concepts of starting to integrate and mix and match systems. So that's where ONVIF's mind is that how do we take these profiles and not just put them in a little bucket and say, you are a camera, so therefore you can only do camera stuff. Well, that camera is a camera in the IoT space is probably the most significant sensor that you can get. A thermocouple tests temperature. The humidity sensors and all those, they have one specific function. In a camera, I can look at temperature gradients, I can look at image quality, I can look at various other things to collect data or metadata and feed that into an access control system or a building management system. So we start talking about different applications. So we're looking at, in a couple of the next slides you're going to see is use cases on where Profile A fit in. So we looked at what Profile A was doing. It was talking about granting and revoking credentials. It was talking about the enablement of integration between systems. So that was our step there. So if you go to the next couple of slides, Perry, you can chime in here as well. Use cases from a security guard. Security guards looking at the ability to take the access control system and Profile A to take the integration of the VMS using a PSIM to collect data, to take that credential, and how do we get that, how would a security officer use it? So it was the manual unlock. So there's a lot of different use cases in there where a security guard would use that from a perspective.
I think a very good example is what they call the door stations. That comes with a camera and a keypad for dialing up. So when you press those buttons, you call the guard on duty, and you can see the face of the guy that wants to come in. And this is not really a camera,
right,
but it is a camera. So it's in different shapes. So it sort of bridges between the two disciplines. It's an access control device, but it's also a camera. Uses the camera to support that. And I think we're going to even more sophisticated use cases. You have receptionists where you can assign credentials and you can configure time and spatial modes. In human resources, when you add a new employee, assign credentials, disable, set expectations, or is it expectation or exemptions?
It's expectation.
Expectation, yeah. And you can batch create and update credentials. So there are different use cases, and I think there's even one more here that.
Yeah, from the security officer, the managing, we talk about contractors coming on site and how does that contractor get handled for on site? So you match the security officer with the receptionist, and what do they need to do to get that contractor on site to do what the contractor's been hired to do? So all these occupancies, the rules that go with that. So Profile A really got into the guts of how that system was designed.
So let's talk a little bit about open standards and their impact and barriers to open adoption. So we believe that with open standards, you're definitely lowering the cost of integration, and also you're lowering the cost of maintaining, because many integrated systems today, they're built once and maintained forever, and quite often it's quite high cost for the organizations that deploys this. So if we have open standards in the market, we avoid that. We get a de facto standard, which you take just from the shelf. The products already have them integrated, and you don't have to maintain this in the future developments. We get increased consumer awareness of the benefits of these because they become more accessible information-wise and also price-wise to the broader end-user community. And you also get a higher competition between component manufacturers. They will then compete on other values than being the only, say, approved or technically possible solution for an integrated system, which we think is a healthy contribution to the industry. Because most end users and other organizations, the thing they don't like is the lock-in from specific manufacturers.
Yeah, and the question there on the threat to the industry, you know, from the larger manufacturers, what the larger manufacturers are identifying is that technology is expanding so fast, they can't hire people and they can't keep their employee and engineers trained on all the new technologies that are being developed. So if they can use a standard and develop to a standard so that all these other companies that are coming about with this new technology, that they can communicate with them and allow more effective growth of their product because they've developed towards a standard, they're saying that that is more valuable to them because their product becomes more valuable to integrators and to end users from a installation perspective.
And you touched a little bit on that the supplier is concerned about the competition, but we believe from ONVIF being the technical alliance that we are, that we bring out the true values of companies that would like to compete. They're not competing, as I said, on the lock-in effect. So we believe that this will keep also the manufacturers on their toes to be able to make sure that they deliver the best values to the customers. Because we know that, but one of the barriers is also the fact that if you've been looking into ONVIF profiles, you will see that the functionality scope is maybe somewhat limited. But we do believe that from the organization's point of view, that if everything was being standardized, it will be more difficult to differentiate the different manufacturers. So from ONVIF's point of view, we focus on laying a foundation where we cover most of the essential functionalities, and then it's up to the individual manufacturers to concentrate on developing the smart features that differentiate them from other manufacturers. Otherwise, the how should we say, the incentive to be innovative and develop new features will be somewhat dampened, I would say. And we believe that this works quite well. So even though there are some limitations in functionality, there is a reason for it.
For me,
Sorry, please.
For me, the question that I have is really, will demand from end users force top suppliers into adopting a mentality where open standards are a necessity in order to retain their market share? The same question was presented in an area that I've studied extensively in the past, building automation, about 15 or 20 years ago. 15 or 20 years ago, the building automation market was very similar, in my opinion, to where the access control market is today, where there were a handful, about a half dozen in building automation equipment's circumstance, about a half dozen major manufacturers of building automation equipment, and the majority of systems were proprietary standards were dominant in the market, and there was kind of a slow growth for some of the open standards in that market, but we weren't seeing anything dramatic. There wasn't any expectation that within 5 or 10 years there was going to be a dramatic change. And what ended up happening was, as protocols like BACnet, like KNX, became more popular in the building automation space, it was really the end users, building owners, integrators, installers, who began expecting open standards in their design for systems, building automation systems. And so for the top manufacturers, it became a matter of we had better adopt and include open protocols with our equipment, or we're going to lose out, we're going to begin losing and bleeding market share. And I think that's kind of a similar question that I would pose to you both as, well, to everyone in the audience, is whether that kind of transition is possible in access control. Because I don't really see, absent that demand from end users, I don't really see the top 5, 6, 7, 8 access control manufacturers that constitute such a large portion of the market share. I don't see them voluntarily moving in this direction.
They're not voluntarily. I think what we're seeing is that the comment I made before is we're starting to see that they can't keep up with the changes in the technology,
right,
and they can't keep enough engineers trained. So and there's so many startup companies that are giving pieces of an access control system. So you got the biometrics companies coming out and saying, hey, look at our newest fingerprint reader, and it's using this with some new protocol. Right. And they're not trained on necessarily that protocol. So we're starting to see that growth become them saying, hey, I'm going to miss out if I don't open up. Mm-hmm. So.
And then, of course, we have the overwhelming concern about cybersecurity. When we're talking open standards, specifically ONVIF in this auditorium here, is that everything ONVIF does is built on other IT standards. We don't invent anything. We combine already existing standards to work in a desired fashion and manner. And that means that any concern that you have around cybersecurity would, of course, be deployable with anything that is based on ONVIF. In integrating multiple systems, this is a concern. And anyone who engages in this needs to get an expert involved, because this is an exposure, and I think we have seen numerous breaches taking place where the perpetrator manages to find a way into a adjacent system. Mm-hmm. So this is a serious concern, and there are professionals in the industry that can address this. But this would be a problem anyway, so it's not really an additional problem. So this really needs some attention, and it's understandable that this is a concern and probably would make people think twice. Do you want to add something to this, no?
Good.
Okay. So we're carrying on and with the benefits of ONVIF and other standards as we see it. So you get increased flexibility and greater freedom of choice. You can select product from a variety of manufacturers to get a product that really fits your need. If it's this new smart biometric sensor, or if it's this new smart keypad with a special design that really fits into your system, you don't have to go and get everything from the same vendor. It future-proofs the systems and gives you a more secure environment, because you mix and match. You can prolong the lifespan of the system by just adding and replacing already approved or conformant product into the system.
Yeah, I don't like the term future-proofing, but yes. Reliable interoperability, again, we've seen, what I do is a lot of testing, and it's finding out if they truly meet the design and conformance. So when you talk about in the ONVIF space, if you claim that you meet a profile, I should be able to put two devices that do that profile together. And the biggest problem I find that I've heard from end users and integrators is that, hey, I put them together and they don't work. Well, yeah, but there's also some interface guides that the manufacturers provide. So it works using the ONVIF profile as long as you do the proper adjustment to the device. All right, so look at the interface guides and look at how those systems work, because we're seeing that once the people understand how the implementation is supposed to occur, they're very happy with it. So it's just understanding that reliable interoperability is that, yes, it can be interoperable. It's just think through it and pull out the manual. The engineers that try and put something together without the manual, and then they say, hey, it doesn't work. I used to be one of those guys, and one of my engineers really taught me to take the time to pull out and read the directions. So
you get a more service-oriented architecture, and that we expect that all the details or all the settings of the device is actually stored in the device itself, so you don't get dependent on the management system of this. And as we said before, that we're starting to see interoperability between video and access control system to take full advantage of the capabilities. ONVIF has put a lot of effort in collaborating with the other standard organizations, because one of the biggest objectives are to harmonize, to make sure that everyone is moving in the same direction. So already since 2008, the ONVIF standards for video have been incorporated, and we're updating those specifications now to the latest Profile T for video. And since this year, we also have the interoperability section for the access control in international standard, totally based on ONVIF. It's, however, not called ONVIF within that organization because they have their own brand name. And we have memoranda of understanding with OSDP and also with PSIA to make sure that we do harmonize and do not create conflict, because openness and transparency between the organization is really, really, really important.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with OSDP, please take a look at it. The Wiegand protocol, we've talked about it for many, many years. It's, you talk about cybersecurity. Wiegand is the most vulnerable in the access control system. And it's not just the communication of the card to the reader, it's the reader to the control panel. You can go online and pay $50 and get a little Bluetooth chip and insert that into the line and hack that any user that goes through that door and gain access to that door through a smartphone based upon that Bluetooth chip being installed. So just watch OSDP. One of the things that I've talked to several manufacturers, again, you need to understand how that wiring is done, how the control panels are accepting OSDP, read the instructions, and find out from the various access control manufacturers how that OSDP is embedded into the system. Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself.
Yeah, we're running out of time here, so we want to leave some time for questions. So this was, I think, the presentation you gave. Yeah. So if we want to conclude this, we don't think that the proprietary approach has much future. We believe that interoperability with open standard is the way forward. And if you have the time and not being that familiar with ONVIF, we do encourage you to take a look at their website.